This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing series of leadership discussions. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by another colleague from the commercial seafood industry in Australia. He's also the National Accounts Manager for Woolworths for Tassal Operations, Matt Wassnig. Matt, welcome to the program. Look, I've been looking forward to speaking with you for a little while, and I know everyone's life gets busy, so I do appreciate your time tonight. Welcome to the program. Can I start with where I've started with every other podcast by asking you, in which industry was your first leadership role and why did you take it on, mate?
So my first leadership role was involved with science, really. So I finished up my undergraduate degree and I ended up taking on a PhD, and that was up at James Cook University. And during that role, I actually ended up doing quite a bit of lecturing and tutoring of aquaculture courses at James Cook University. And that was probably my first real leadership role. So not only, I guess, performing a leadership role in the classroom, but also performing a leadership role amongst my other colleagues. So I had some other teaching staff that I was working closely with, and I was given the responsibility of coordinating a lot of the course content and the direction. So, that was probably the first time that I had led a team.
So and I'm curious, and thank you for sharing that. I'm curious to ask when, and this hasn't come up yet, when you've got a teaching role, particularly in a university setting, did you see that position as a leadership position, or did you see it as purely a teaching role? Did you make a differentiation at any stage, Matt, with that position when you were at JCU?
Look, I did see it as a leadership role. I think in essence, when you have the responsibility of you've got students that are there that are probably going to go on and do some big things in the space that you're teaching in, and they're looking for, I think, that guidance and that mentorship early on in their career in that direction. So as much as I wasn't perhaps overseeing everything that they did, it was a chance for me to have a leadership influence in more of a mentoring role in being able to guide them to get the best out of themselves and maybe to identify what would be a good direction for them to take in terms of a career path.
Excellent. So did that, Matt, spark an interest in you to take on more formal leadership roles post your time with JCU, or was it you weren't necessarily looking for a leadership role at that stage?
So from there, I went on to start my own company, which is unusual for somebody coming out of academia to go on and do that. But I wanted to get involved, I guess, hands-on with aquaculture and do something for myself as well. So I partnered with somebody else who had experience in the field of aquaculture, and the two of us went away from R&D and more into operations. And I knew at that stage that I was going to have a team of staff under me to manage the farm operations. But I was confident, I think, through the experience of the teaching role in interacting with people, guiding them, trying to get the best out of them and motivating them, that I'd be able to handle a team. And I really look forward to that aspect of running my own business.
Mate, like all of my podcast guests, you've helped me segue into the next question quite nicely, which is around, in your experience, did you find, or do you find, a difference between the leadership function and management function within the organisations that you've worked in?
I think that ideally the two work hand in hand. So I do think that they are different concepts, and I think that you can certainly be a manager without necessarily being a leader, but I think that the best managers are leaders, because I think that what they do is they foster the best performance out of the people around them and under them, and really motivate that team to achieve whatever the overarching goal is. So I think that they are certainly different things, and I've come across many mentors and leaders in my life that haven't necessarily been in management positions or been managing me, and vice versa. I've had managers as well that I haven't felt really had leadership skills, and but certainly those that are in the most influential positions that I've interacted with, I think tend to have that real leadership acumen in being able to, drive a team and motivate those people around them and lift everybody to achieve a common goal. So.
And that's a great distinction between the two. So thank you for that. My next question is around mistakes that leaders make. So, again, using your experience, how do you engage with an error or a mistake that's attributed to you, Matt?
Look, I try and acknowledge it. I think is always important, and I think that that's important in a leadership role to be able to acknowledge when you have made a mistake. And it's not necessarily having your tail between your legs. I mean, you can do that with an explanation as to why it's happened, but making sure that people know that you're aware of what's happened, and then try and address it front on, I think. So take corrective action as quickly as you can and make the best out of the situation. And if you can, then use it as a learning experience. So take something from that so that you can either not repeat the same mistake, or if you figured out that if something does crop up like that and you've got a good method to rectify it, then try and employ that again next time. And it doesn't always work out that way. Like sometimes one mistake can lead into another when you're trying to fix it, but they're all learning experiences. But I think the most important thing for me is to acknowledge it and then address it head on.
Mate, again, you killed my next question around that. And in as much as in your experiences, have you found that mistakes or making errors of judgment, whatever you want to call it, is a learning experience? And you obviously said that it is. So let me segue into the next part of this series of questions. And again, not trying to be too negative, but I guess I need to ask this. What in your travels is the most difficult part about being a leader?
I think probably the most difficult part of being a leader is gaining the respect of your colleagues, but without them feeling as though you're running your own agenda and dictating terms to them. So, I think that the best leaders have a real collaborative approach with those that are around them and perhaps working in roles that report into them. I think that when people try to micromanage or it becomes a bit of a dictatorship, people just don't react well to that. I mean, we all want to be autonomous. We all want to be carving our own pathway. And so when people try and micromanage you, generally people react negatively to that. So there's a challenge there because you have to be, as a leader, a lot of the time task-oriented, and you need to motivate these people to do what's needed. But you need to do it in a way so that you're guiding them rather than telling them what to do.
Okay, so let's segue into something more positive. How do you measure success as a leader, Matt?
Well, I think measuring success as a leader, I think there's so many different measures. I mean, in the world that I operate in, commercial outcomes is a lot of the time the measure that's used. But for me, there are softer measures that are equally as valuable. And I think that is around respect of colleagues and being able to get the most out of a team. And I think that really good leaders identify where the strengths are in their team, and they're able to exploit those strengths and have people feeling appreciated and rewarded for what they're doing, but also making sure that you focus on where you need to build strength as well, and allowing people to do that and facilitating that and encouraging that. And sometimes that comes with tough conversations where you have to go to people and probably outline for them where you see their weaknesses being. But then I think you should follow that up with a plan on how you might be able to assist them in addressing those.
Yeah, that's something that hasn't been explicitly brought up in the previous podcasts around having that, if I can use your words, that tough discussion or conversation with someone around their performance, because I guess that has two prongs to it. One being hey, we need to fix what potentially is a deficit in how you're doing your job, but then secondly, trying to catch it as an opportunity to do something different and something better. To help the business get along, because at the end of the day, you're there to achieve some goals. Or has that always been a difficult thing for you, having those conversations, Matt, or is that a fairly simple thing to bring up?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily difficult for me, and that I'm not uncomfortable in offering constructive criticism, because I think as long as it's done in a constructive way, then it's productive. And it's not something that I've shied away from doing. But it can be difficult sometimes when it triggers an emotional response in people. and they feel insulted, or they feel upset, or they feel inadequate. So what you've got to do is make sure that you get past that stage as quickly as possible. So as you said, presenting it as an opportunity for them to strengthen where they may have weaknesses, and then be able to contribute to the team better, and then we can all achieve goals more proficiently. So I think that you can turn it into a positive, but sometimes you do need to start off by addressing where things have gone wrong, and there's no use in sweeping that under the carpet or ignoring it, because it will just continue to be there, and then you're not really helping that person grow.
Yeah, and that's good advice for anyone in any leadership position. And I can't speak for all leaders here, but I could speak for myself in that I would find it exceedingly difficult to have that conversation. But I guess if it's always couched in constructive language and not destructive, or something that's going to undermine the confidence of the person that you're working with, then we should have a positive outcome towards the end of that. Look, Matt, I want to take you to a couple of statements here and get your feeling on some of these. So I'll start with on-the-job experience develops better leaders. What's your view of that as a statement, Matt?
I would say that it's a true statement. I think that experience on the job is essential too, and I think that one of the essential elements is being able to observe other leaders and see and make your own judgments about what you think or what you like about their style, and if you think they're getting the best out of their team, and what you might be able to then emulate when you go into your own career. And then vice versa, a lot of the time you can observe negative management or a management style that you really don't agree with. And I think until you get into the workplace at ground level and you're managed by somebody else, you don't really get that appreciation for what makes for a good leader versus potentially a leader that isn't as productive. So I think that you can learn about leadership, and you can learn about the concepts of management theoretically, but until you're really out there in the workplace and you're experiencing it firsthand at any level, you don't really understand it.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Formal education helps to develop better leaders.
I think formal education can contribute to leaders' ability to be able to control their time, so time management, and also to, undertake projects and be self-motivated to get the best out of themselves. All of those are skills that you learn through formal education. But I don't think that it's necessary to be a good leader. I think that there's many different types of education, and every day we're getting an education when we go out into the world and do something different, which is every day. So no matter what you're doing, I think if you're doing it productively and you're applying yourself, then you're getting an education, and that can lead into good leadership and good management skills. So I think there's many different pathways, and formal education is not necessary for a great leader, but and I've met great leaders that have had it and great leaders that haven't, and but I think that it depends where you want to take your career. If you want to go into a professional setting where there's a certain skill set and acumen that's expected, then of course it helps.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now, here's a statement that I've had lots of interesting responses to. I'm not going to put money on where you'll go with this one, but I'll ask anyway and see how we go. Leaders are born, not made.
Yeah.
Sorry, I like that pause, because everyone, without exception, has taken that pause to go, do I sit on the fence on this one, or do I go one way or another? And for the benefit,
temptation is to hedge your bets and say it can be either.
Yeah.
But I think I'll start with that. I think the term "a born leader" has some merit to it and has some truth to it. There are people that you meet, and sometimes you meet them at a very young age, and they assume that leadership role. And it could be in a sporting team that you're involved with as a kid. It could just be in the classroom or amongst your group of mates, whatever it is. And so I think that, those people probably don't have a whole lot of life experience at that stage of their life, but tend to just go into that leadership role. Now, whether they're a born leader, probably not born with it. I mean, there's maybe a genetics aspect to it, but maybe they've been exposed to really strong leadership skills at a very young age, and maybe that happened in the household. And so, they appear as born leaders because they've got that confidence so early on. But at the same time, I think that there's people that are naturally maybe shy, and shy people can be great leaders too, but then they develop that confidence in themselves to be able to lead people, and that can take time. And it can take exposure to lots of different things and scenarios, and maybe to find your niche where you can be a leader. And for some people that happens later, and it's a real progressive thing. And for other people that are seen as the born leaders, it seems to happen automatically. So, look, I guess I have hedged my bets there because I think there's merit. I would say that those people that are perhaps emerging leaders or have aspiring to be leaders, but they feel it doesn't come naturally to them because they've never been identified as a born leader, I would say that there's probably a lot of untapped potential there, and it's just about finding that.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective, Matt. Matt, this is the part of the podcast where I ask for your view on a couple of things. So I'm finishing my tertiary studies around looking at leadership development, and particularly two what I'm calling critical leadership capabilities, one being strategic thinking and one foresight, as two of those capabilities that leaders need into the future, particularly in the ag sector. From your experience, what are your views on those two capabilities? What I'm not seeking here is just agreement with me, but from your travels, what's your view on strategic thinking and foresight from a leader perspective?
I think that strategic thinking is essential for a leader. You need to be able to identify the bigger picture and see where you, your organisation or your team fit within that, and think about how you can navigate the landscape to give you the best possible outcome. And without strategic thinking, you're not going to be able to do that. So I think that strategic thinking is essential. And foresight, look, I think that you need to be aware of patterns and what may happen going into the future. But I think that you don't want to get too caught up in focusing on trying to predict what's going to happen. And I think that you need to just probably, people that focus too much on foresight can perhaps be a little less reactive to what's happening in their current environment. So I think that it's important to have some foresight. I think strategic thinking to know exactly where you fit within the overall puzzle and think big picture as much as you can is really, really beneficial. And that's something that I've probably had to learn as I've gone along. And, when you're at school, you tend to not look at the big picture. You tend to be, or even when you're doing undergraduate studies, you tend to be very task oriented and focusing on what's directly in front of you. But when you get out into the world and you start working, particularly in a business type environment, you have to be very aware of how everything impacts everything else. And you have to have an overarching goal that you're strategically aligned to and heading towards, and know what all the steps are in between. So, but that's something that comes with experience.
Look, with just trying to unpack a question here, that strategic thinking in the segment of the commercial seafood industry in which you operate, do you see that as an essential skill set? Because and why I ask this is, and I'm genuinely curious, is that I work with people in the wildcat sector, and it's a slightly different game to aquaculture, and so from an aquaculture perspective, is strategic thinking a key capability you've seen in leaders in that sector?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, it's an ever-evolving sector. It's evolving very quickly. It's largely still a fledgling industry in most aspects, with the exception of a few species. But I think that because it's evolving so quickly and things are changing so quickly, you need to be having a strategy about where you're headed and how you're going to develop as a company, as a team, to achieve those objectives. So, and also I think that it's our industry, unfortunately, can not always be cohesive. So I think that if you have a level of strategic thinking and you're able to form partnerships and alliances within your own industry to be able to achieve common goals, and that really does involve that high level strategic thinking and being able to bring others into that and get them enthusiastic about it. I think that that's where our future leaders are going to lay. People that are probably not really too focused on exactly what they're doing, but looking at where the industry is headed strategically and how then they can strategically align with other partners within the industry to achieve a positive result for numerous parties, not just themselves.
Yeah, okay. And wow, I could talk for a long time about that stuff, but look, we'll move on to the final question, Matt, and this one I'm particularly interested to see what you have to say. What might you say to a younger version of you, Matt, about being an effective leader?
I would say that you've got to play to your strengths, and what would I say to myself? I would say that really focus on positive motivation as your number one tool, because that is how you're going to get the best out of people and have them aligned to your thinking and your goals is through positive motivation, not negative motivation. For me, I've never found it effective to tell people that they're not quite good enough as a motivator for them to get better. I think that you're much better off having them feel appreciated and valued for the things that they do well. And the reason that they're there and the reason that you've kept them close to you is because they do something well. So acknowledge that and then address where they can improve and where they can get stronger and coach them on that pathway. And so I've never really appreciated when I've seen that management style of, I guess, telling people off or making them feel as though they're not doing a great job as a way for them to strive to do better. Because for me, I think that it's counterproductive and all it does is damage morale. And for me, if I could say to my younger self, one of the key things, if you've ever got a team underneath you, is team morale. Do what you can to foster that. Like, make sure people are happy. People are happy to be there. Make sure that they feel as though that they're contributing to something that is meaningful and that they're playing a key part and a role in that. And make sure that they're emotionally invested in it as well. And if you manage your team correctly, you can get them emotionally invested in just about anything if they feel as though they're contributing to something that's heading to a common goal. So that would be my number one tip to my younger self. Along with that, you have to temper that with having the ability to have the hard conversations and being able to, sometimes, knuckle down and give somebody some really constructive criticism. So never shy away from doing that. But if you can then turn that into a positive so you can maintain morale, then you'll be a good leader.
And on that note, Matt, that was an extremely positive response to that last question. And look, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And, if I asked you this question 20 years from now where we look about the same age, so we'll be in our mid to early 60s and you're looking at an end of career, you might say something very different to a younger version of yourself. And looking back can be quite easy because you've had life experience to make your judgment calls on. But one thing that's been brought up when this question's been asked that I found curious is that I can't remember which of the two podcasts it was, but somebody said when you think back to that younger version of yourself, one thing you don't want to do is stop yourself from taking a risk. Do you think your risk appetite has always been big in that you're prepared to take that bigger risk to see a payoff at the end? Does risk scare you in that sense, or do you look at it as a challenge?
I would say that probably contentment scares me more than risk. I'm always wanting to challenge myself, and a lot of the time that does come with risk because you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone And in doing that, you're taking a personal risk, and whether or not you're going to sink or you're going to swim. But for me, I find that that's the essence of life, and that's the only way to sort of grow as an individual, is put yourself in those risky situations. And so I'm not risk averse at all. In saying that, I think that you need to be measured and do your due diligence as well. So I think if you can balance those two things, where you can do your due diligence but not talk yourself out of a risky idea, then that's an ideal place to sit, because there will always be lots of reasons not to do something. And there's quite often more reasons not to do it than what there are reasons to do it. Sometimes you've got to follow your gut, couple that with some due diligence, so you can think, well, I've done my homework, and so no one can ever accuse me of not at least looking into it. And but at the end of the day, you just have to step off the edge of the diving board.
Wow, and that is a really, really positive way to end the podcast. So for the listeners, thank you again for joining me for Talking Leadership. Every conversation is bringing up some new issues to consider around the issue of leadership. So, Matt, I do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Derek. It's been a pleasure.
And for those listening, that was Matt Wassnig, who has joined me from Tasmania. You're in Hobart, Matt?
I'm not actually. I'm based in Sydney. So TASAL have head office in Hobart, but they also have offices in Melbourne and Sydney. So.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so I stand corrected. I'm talking to Matt from the sunny suburbs of Sydney, but we won't hold that against you, mate. So thanks again, my friend. And for those listening, please join us again on the next podcast. And thanks very much. Cheers, Matt.
Thanks, Eric. Cheers.